Her name was Alara. She didn't speak. Her voice was empty. In a world where a person's power was defined by their echo, invisible threads symbolizing their bondage and a master's influence, Alara was nothing. When Boss Vance, the quarry overseer, dragged her onto the stage where the desperate were sold, she wasn't afraid. Her eyes, the color of rain-washed sky, scanned the crowd, searching for a lost memory that had vanished with her echo. "Look at her emptiness," Boss Vance roared, his loud echo inflicting pain on those he called prisoners. "This hollow shell, once said to have a free spirit, is now a burden. She pollutes the space with her silence. Who will buy her for her last forced labor?" The first bid came from a technocrat who needed cheap hands. The second, from a flesh trader. Then came Silas, from the shadows, where even the most powerful master's influence couldn't reach. He had no discernible face, hidden by a deep hood, and no voice, only the soft rustle of his steps. He approached Boss Vance. His hand, visible from beneath his cloak, was unusual. Instead of a palm, there was a smooth, polished metal plate. He extended it, and a faint but constant light shimmered on the plate. It was the light of those who had lost freedom, but kept their essence. "She is not for your usual trade," resonated in Boss Vance's mind, not with words, but with a silent pressure. The overseer stumbled, feeling his usual power suddenly vanish. The auction froze. The crowd felt a cold dread from this silent presence. Alara, for the first time, felt not just emptiness, but a strange warmth slowly entering her frozen soul. Silas, without a word, simply nodded towards the exit. Boss Vance twitched helplessly as Silas gently took Alara's wrist. His metal palm was surprisingly warm, as if it had absorbed sunlight. It was the first touch that carried no pain or humiliation. Alara, accustomed to roughness, allowed him to lead her. They left the Nightmare Tower and stepped onto the wind-swept plateau. The dispersing crowd watched them with a mix of fear and curiosity. No one dared to speak, as the stranger's silent echo still hung in the air. A warning. Silas led her through narrow, dirty streets, past gloomy houses with crooked windows, where those who had lost their freedom hid, and where hunger reigned constantly. They stopped near a rickety hut on the edge of the settlement. The door, made of old scrap metal, barely hung on rusty hinges. Inside, there was a dim light mixed with the smell of dust and something strange but pleasant, the scent of herbs and a warm, inexplicable calm. Silas sat on a creaky bench, signaling Alara to sit beside him. It was the first place where she wasn't forced to stand, where she could simply exist. He took a small, carefully wrapped piece of dried meat and some wild berries from beneath his cloak. His movements were slow but confident. He offered her the food. Alara was used to food always being a struggle, a handful of scraps to snatch or earn with sweat and humiliation. She looked at the meat, disbelieving, then at Silas, searching for a trick. But his face was hidden, his presence calm. It was her first food, given without conditions, without expectation of repayment. She carefully took the meat. It was dry, but it had a taste she'd forgotten, the taste of freedom from constant hunger. As she ate, Silas watched her, not judgmentally, not with pity, but with a strange attentiveness. When she finished, he extended his metal palm again, and on it, next to the faint light of essence, appeared a small, polished stone. It was smooth, like a river pebble, and had a subtle blue tint, similar to her mark of doom. He ran a metal finger across the surface of the stone, then over his own roughly bandaged wound, where a hand had probably once been. A quiet, soundless pressure resonated in her mind. Stone. Hard. Essence. Your name? Alara shivered. A name. She had never had a name. She was just Mark. Silent. Shell. But never. a name. She looked at the stone, then at her blue mark. The stone was as silent as she, but it held a power that needed no shouts. She took the stone, clenching it in her palm. It was cold, yet strangely comforting. It was her first name, one she could choose herself. Stone resonated silently in her head, echoing with an unfamiliar but personal feeling. Silas seemed to understand. He gave a subtle nod, and that was more than 1,000 words. In that moment, in a dilapidated hut on the edge of the world, Elara, or now Stone, realized something new was beginning, something that had nothing to do with fear or pain. Days turned into quiet weeks. Silas continued to teach her not with words, but with actions. He showed her how to find food in the barren lands, how to recognize danger not by loud echoes, but by subtle shifts in the ground's vibrations. He taught her silent observation, which was stronger than any scream. She learned to read the world, not with her eyes, but with essence, the invisible imprint of life. This was her first self-defense, an understanding of the world that gave her an advantage. Elara felt her own inner emptiness, which she had carried all her life, slowly beginning to fill. Not with a loud voice, but with something else. A hardness, like stone, and a quiet, deep presence, like her rescuer. One day, while searching for scrap, they were spotted by technocrats. Their presence was aggressive. Elara felt fear, but she remembered Silas and clenched her stone. She didn't run or scream. She simply stood beside Silas, her eyes looking at the technocrats without fear. Her silent presence and inner strength surprised the attackers. Silas shifted his stance, his essence becoming denser. The technocrats hesitated. They felt that this prisoner was no longer the same. She had a name, she had essence, and she wasn't alone. They retreated, their aggression weakening. It was a small victory, won not by force, but by dignity. Elara felt her breathing lighten. She looked at Silas. He extended his metal palm to her again, and a new, barely noticeable crack appeared on it. It was a sign that her transformation was affecting him, too. The crack on Silas's metal palm deepened each time Elara progressed. Silas never explained it, but Elara felt that her gaining essence was somehow connected to his loss. She began to understand that the world extended beyond their hut. Silas showed her the ruins of ancient cities swallowed by the desert, and the grim towers from which technocrats controlled power across the region. He taught Elara to see traces of other presences, to distinguish their intensity. The strong presence of technocrats meant power, the weak, the fear of prisoners. Her blue mark, once a mark of doom, now seemed to Elara a source of quiet strength, a connection to the ancient metal. One day, near an old spring said to never run dry, they met another prisoner, an old woman named Mara. Her presence was almost imperceptible. Silas silently offered her some berries. It was a rare gesture of kindness. Elara felt her heart ache. She realized there were many like her, lost in this world. She approached Mara, and for the first time, not just remained silent, but consciously shared a piece of her stone. Mara felt the faint but firm essence from Elara's stone, and her eyes brightened. This incident showed Elara her new purpose. She didn't want revenge on those who humiliated her. She wanted to show other prisoners that one could find their essence, their name, even in a world that sought to break them. Silas seemed to sense her thoughts. His metal palm cracked faintly again, but this time the crack looked different. Not like destruction, but like a pattern telling a story. He began leading her to larger settlements, where there were more prisoners, where suffering was deepest. Their path led through the wasteland, lands where great cities once flourished, now only shattered structures, and wind howling through empty windows remained. In the wasteland, various bad groups ruled. gangs and fanatics of the pure wave cult who believed in the annihilation of prisoners for purification. These antagonists were a constant threat, and Ilara learned not only to avoid them, but also to read their presence, to feel their fear and blind faith. One night, while hiding in the ruins of an old metal temple, Ilara felt the approach of Boss Vance, the same one who sold her. His loud, hoarse presence was easy to recognize. He was looking for her. This was his personal revenge, his attempt to restore the status quo, to show that a prisoner could not escape his grasp. Silas prepared for the encounter. Ilara wasn't scared. Her heart beat steadily, like a solid stone. She looked at Boss Vance, who stood a few meters away. "Prisoner, you thought you could escape?" His voice was filled with foul power, but Ilara felt she was no longer a prisoner. She was Ilara. She felt no desire for revenge, only quiet dignity. She emerged from the shadows, clutching her small stone. Boss Vance stopped, his eyes wide with surprise. He saw her, but he couldn't believe it. "Impossible," he rasped, his own power trembling. Ilara remained silent, but her silence was louder than any scream. She simply stood, her posture firm, her eyes calm. Her presence was a challenge to the system itself, which fed on fear and humiliation. Boss Vance tried to take a step, his power vibrating with rage, but Silas stood between them, unchanging and silent. His metal palm lifted, and the shimmer of essence became brighter. It was a warning. The overseer felt his strength draining. You will pay for this!" he snarled. Silas didn't answer. Only his essence held Boss Vance at bay. Finally, he retreated, his anger subsiding, replaced by caution. He knew that an encounter with Silas in the null zone was dangerous, especially with a prisoner radiating such strange resilience. Boss Vance, swaying, turned and vanished into the darkness, his power fading. From that day on, changes began in whisper. Ilara didn't give loud speeches. She simply was there, sharing her stone, teaching others to see the world through essence. She showed them how to find clean water, safe places to sleep, how to distinguish the dangerous presence of technocrats. Her silent help began to change these people. They started to find their own, albeit quiet, essences. Some, inspired by Ilara, began to choose new personal names, abandoning their old nicknames. Boss Vance, learning of this, was furious. He gathered a squad of hired guards and fanatics from the Pure Wave cult. He decided to conduct a demonstration punishment in whisper to definitively crush any attempts by the prisoners to gain dignity. Ilara felt his approach. She wasn't afraid. Her heart beat steadily. She gathered the prisoners, who now had their own names. They were scared, but next to Ilara, they felt a strength they couldn't explain. Silas stood behind her. Boss Vance burst into whisper. "There she is!" he shouted, pointing at Ilara. "The prisoner who decided to change things! I will show you power!" His authority struck the air, but Ilara stood firm. She looked at Boss Vance with calm eyes, which now held no emptiness, but only firm, unyielding resolve. Her silence was a challenge. Instead of fighting, Ilara raised her hand, clutching her small stone. She didn't use a loud display of power. She simply focused all her essence into the stone, and then, with quiet but strong determination, threw it directly at Boss Vance's feet. The stone fell to the dirt, and from it, like a wave, spread a quiet light of essence. This light did not destroy, it simply was. And it silenced Boss Vance and his mercenaries. Boss Vance felt his loud authority choke in this wave of essence. He tried to respond with force, but his power collided with something that had no anger, only pure essence. His eyes trembled, his confidence crumbled. The mercenaries also fell silent. This was not a battle, but a clash of two realities: the loud, empty authority of fear against the quiet, solid essence of dignity. Alara felt the tension leave her body. She didn't triumph. There was only a quiet joy in having stood her ground, in not having bent under pressure. Silas, as always, remained silent. He simply nodded, indicating it was time to move on. They left the ruins, continuing their journey deeper into the wasteland, to larger settlements where there were even more prisoners. Alara knew that Boss Vance would return, and that the fight for dignity was only just beginning. A few days later, they reached a settlement called Whisper. Here, prisoners lived in fear, their presence barely perceptible. People here had no names, only numbers or descriptive nicknames. Silas led Alara to the largest hut, where the elders gathered. He sat in a corner, as always, silent, giving Alara the freedom to act. Alara felt fear. She had never spoken, but now she had her stone. She didn't speak words. Instead, Alara approached each person and gently touched their palm with her stone. As she touched them, a faint light of essence from her stone flowed into them. The faces of the prisoners first showed surprise, then doubt, and then a subtle enlightenment. They felt something long forgotten, their own essence, hidden beneath layers of fear and humiliation. Among them was a young woman, Maya. Her presence was the weakest. When Alara touched her hand, Maya closed her eyes. A tear rolled down her cheek, the first in many years. Silas, watching from the corner, gave a slight nod, and Alara felt the crack on his metal palm deepen further.